my words of wisdom is do not repeat the mistakes of our predecessors. This is a golden opportunity. Don't blow it. I want this to be the most successful thing that the health and fitness industry has done since Jack LaLanne got on television.
This is All Things Fitness and Wellness, hosted by Krissy Vann. Together, we're uniting industry thought leaders and fitfluencers on the mission to inspire innovation and encourage people to live a life fit and well. On today's episode, I'm joined by Eric Durak for an in-depth discussion about GLP-1 and its role in the fitness industry. With over 30 years of experience, Eric has been a pioneer in medical fitness, wellness programming, and research. He's presented at nearly 200 national and international conferences, authored 24 books, and led groundbreaking initiatives in areas like diabetes care, cancer wellness, and injury prevention. In this episode, we're going to be exploring some of the most pressing issues related to GLP-1 medications in the fitness industry. We'll discuss the legal responsibilities that fitness professionals face when working with these medications, what operators should ensure their personal trainers know about them, and how emerging technologies can enhance the member experience for those using GLP-1s. One of the great things about podcasting is that sometimes the conversation starts spontaneously, which is exactly what happened when I connected with Eric. So as we get started, I invite you to jump right in. But before we do dive in, be sure to hit like and subscribe. We have new podcast episodes weekly featuring industry thought leaders and influencers. Plus, you won't want to miss our weekly segment, This Week in Fitness. That's where we crunch the latest fitness business headlines in under 5 minutes, designed specifically for busy executives like you. I'm your host, Krissy Vann, and this is ATFW.
A book called The Wellness Revolution. His name is Paul Zane Pilzer. He used to work for the Reagan administration, very, very high-level economist. And he made predictions in his book. He said, this is a $1 trillion economy that you guys are sitting on. And they loved him so much that they brought him to URSA. I think it was in San Diego that year, and for the keynote spot. And of course, he goes, help me out here. I'm just a lowly economist. You guys only have 20% share of the US marketplace of members, but yet you're going after the YMCAs because their clubs are too pretty. He goes, that doesn't make any sense to me. Of course, they never invited him back. Yeah. But he was absolutely right. They're really good at stealing someone else's members. But how outside of silver sneakers, which is really the first large-scale movement to get Medicare Advantage and Medicare Plus Choice retirees into health clubs. But I don't really see that there's something. This is going to be a movement, Krissy.
Yeah, no doubt. You already can see them, like the rails of the momentum that have happened even just over the last year and a half. And it's just interesting to see. We've kind of just dove in here, so I'm like so rolling with it. I do your intro separately anyways, and I love organic conversation like this. So I'm like, let's just have at her because it's what I'm all about. But
I saw the record button go on.
Yeah, because all of a sudden I was like, oh, he's saying all this great stuff. I'm like,
I'm ready for my close-up.
So I'm like, to your point, even see like the trickle down into the consumer market and the questions that they're asking and the curiosity. It's just the switch and the dam, it has broke, and I think the water now is just
it's gushing. It's not a full-blown tsunami, but the hole that you've put your finger in the dike is not going to work anymore. But here, so I had a conversation with a guy that I ran track with 40 years ago in college. And we're talking about the Olympic decathlon, which just ended a couple days ago in Paris, because 4 years ago, his son was in the Olympic decathlon in Tokyo. So he ran track in college with me and all this stuff. And he goes, oh, by the way, Eric, I'm taking semaglutide. And I'm like, oh, really? Because he's been heavy for a number of years, and he had some thyroid issue when he was in his 30s, and he just ballooned up, and he just has had so much trouble losing weight. And I said, all right, Gary, what I need you to do is to weigh yourself, do body composition every week, get your blood pressure done on a regular basis, track your foods, track all this kind of, you're going to be a case study for him. And he goes, okay. So, because everyone's going to be on this.
Yeah. Well, and I think, like, to your point too, the openness of people already, I kind of equate it to the cosmetics industry where for so long Botox was the secret. Everyone was doing it and not talking about it. And then now they're out there being open. And I think that we're going to have the same impact with this, where it's kind of like, yes, this is part
Right.
of my like maintenance and healthcare routine. But to your point, trillions of dollars. Like when you look at the
Yeah.
projection of the
Oh
economy
my
of
God.
this, it is massive. And you
Yeah.
notice everybody wanting a piece. I think it was a couple of months ago, it was Nestle, and their press release was all about how they were creating a special food product line, of course, because it's like they all want their piece of the pie. But the
Right.
fitness industry really does feel like this natural fit. That being
Yep.
said, there
Yep.
are sins of the past that I feel
Ah,
can lend some skepticism when it comes to certain supplements that
Have
were
you
passed
read my
around.
book?
I haven't.
Okay, no, I'm a joke. You haven't. You're going to get a copy of it. But the very first chapter that I wrote in this book was the legal aspects of working with GLP-1 patients. And what I wrote in there is, do you remember what happened to New York sports clubs in 2003 when such and such, and I went back to the archives. I looked at the
Right.
case. They actually settled out of court for only $2.8 million, but it was like a $28 million lawsuit against New York sports clubs. So I thought $2.8 million was, it was what it was, but it could have been horrible.
Yeah. What was it that they were prescribing, so to speak, at that time, or recommending to their clients? Do you recall?
Wasn't prescribing anything. He was recommending a protein supplement that had whatever this supplement was, had a certain amount of ephedra, which normally wouldn't be that big a deal. But this guy had just got done exercise, was taking blood pressure medications, et cetera, and went home and died. All right. So whose fault is it? Well, maybe he had a bad taxi ride. He lived in New York. Come on, everyone's stressed out in New York. That was a huge, huge black eye to the industry. And I've said this because I'm already starting. I mean, I'm doing a podcast now every week. Being the senior elder statesman now of the industry, which I find also ironic, my words of wisdom is do not repeat the mistakes of our predecessors. This is a golden opportunity. Don't blow it. Get certified, get knowledgeable, talk with your doctors, Pete Moore is an industry giant. And about a month or two ago, he did a podcast with my PR company, Eric Malzone, and the Future of Fitness podcast. And he goes, well, if I had a health club and I wanted to get these Ozempic patients in the door, I'd draw a 10-mile circle around my club, and I'd go to every doctor's office there, and I'd hand them brochures saying, we're working with these patients. You may be orthopedic, but you may know an internal medicine. You may be a primary care doc, but you may know an endocrinologist, or you may be an endocrinologist who knows someone else. And therefore, hell, pediatricians are going to be prescribing this now. This is insane. I mean, somebody just asked me,
that's a wild thought.
What do you think about this drug? And I say, well, I don't like it, but I don't like the opioids, and they're still prescribing them. I hated the COVID shots. I thought that was the biggest debacle in medicine. This morning, I was up at 4:30, and I'm watching a gentleman from, I think it's Australia, look at the latest figures that are out on worldwide deaths. And it's a 500-page document by some think tank that spent a long time looking at it. And he says, you just don't have 31 million excess deaths in 3 years. Where did it come from? So they broke it down by country. They broke it down literally in some places by county, because it had to do with the health system that was, anyway.
Of course.
I don't want to get into that, but I'm just saying that the industry can utilize their greatest asset is strength training machines. Krissy, what do you have as a health club that the clinic down the street doesn't have? We've got Matrix. We've got Cybex.
And if they're taking that medication, they have muscle loss.
It's, in many cases, it's up to 40%. That's the danger right there. To me, when people ask me what's the biggest, from a physiologist standpoint, where do I think the biggest issue is? I say it's the water. Because there's two things. When you lose 30, 35, 40% of your, quote, lean tissue, it's mostly water. You're losing water. My work in cancer patients, we had them sip water on a regular basis because we knew that chemotherapy and radiation therapy dehydrates the body. and they have a lot of similar characteristics to GLP-1 patients, in that if you're on chemotherapy, you usually don't eat much, you're nauseous, you throw up a lot. Okay, your digestion is all screwed up. You either have constipation or diarrhea, which are two of the side effects of GLP-1s. And you don't drink a lot of water because it just doesn't, I don't know, it just doesn't taste good. You don't want, anyway. So we would work through that. And I've spoken with people that said, well, you have no idea what the ramifications are going to be in working with these people. And I said, yeah, I do, because I got 10,000 hours working with diabetes, end-stage renal disease. You want to talk about someone who's dehydrated, high-risk pregnancies, cancer patients, seniors, and a few morbidly obese. So that's my street cred. And I will put my experience and the experience of my peers and say, okay, we don't want to do the mistakes, but this is how we can really construct the most beautiful program that will get these people to be members for life. And that's exactly what I talk about in the manual. Actually, I point to this because I have a whole...
Yeah, I was like, hold it up there. We've got video.
Yeah, so this is the GLP-1 manual. It's not very big. I don't have a 500-page manual like I used to write in the olden days. But it's also digital. And starting this week, as a matter of fact, before my last interview, I'm working on my YouTube videos. So every chapter here is going to have I'm going to have 7 or 8 modules with very, very short exams. They're all on SurveyMonkey. People will take those. Once they're done with the modules, they'll get the certificate and off we go. I want it to be simple, but I want people to understand that there are certain things they need to know pretty well. And one of them is, and I'm going to put a plug in for Lifetime. Last week I was on I listened to a podcast from Jim Laval, who is the head of the Miura program at Lifetime. And I didn't know him very well, but oh my God, he's a pharmacist, so he's the bad guy. Well, he's not the bad guy. And as a matter of fact, I love how he has scaled his prescription dosages to go a little bit higher in the middle of the program. And then after that, they start tapering every 4 weeks. I love it. So, because my question in the chat box was, when do these people get off this drug? And
Fair.
it's like, well, here, this is when. If they're this amount of weight, it'll be a higher dosage. But if they're a little bit less and whatever, they can still taper off. He's got his bell-shaped curve, and I love that because that's what needs to be done. But what they want to do, Krissy, they want to have these people be members for life. And that's exactly, I wrote this in the manual before I even knew the man. If you would have asked me, well, I wouldn't have been on a podcast 4 months ago because I didn't even know what GLP was back then.
Wild.
I had heard of Ozempic. I didn't know any of this stuff. And Melzone says to me, he goes, you should probably write a manual because nobody has one. And I said, I don't want to get in CEU business. It's too much work.
Yet here you are.
Yet here I am. And you know what? I used to work with a woman when I was when I moved to California in the 80s. I worked for Sansum Diabetes Research Institute, which is here in Santa Barbara. And in 1931, Dr. William Sansum was the first American physician, just behind Banting and Best, to administer insulin to a live person. Right. And it's a fascinating story. I don't have the book here on my shelf, but it was a very, very interesting historical read about how doctors Banting and Best in Toronto and all these other doctors in the States. Well, yeah, everybody knows Banting and Best, but Sansum was right up there with them. And I think they isolated an insulin compound in, February of 31. And he was in May 31st is when he injected a patient here in Santa Barbara. So Santa Barbara is kind of this hub. And I worked with a woman named Lois Jovanovic. And Dr. Jovanovic was widely considered in her lifetime to be one of the leading, if not the leading authority in the management of diabetes and pregnancy. So not only did I have to understand the mechanisms of type 1 and type 2, I had to learn obstetrics and gynecology because I was working with pregnant women who, by the way, were at high risk of having macrosomic infants. So we had to tailor things, and we had a couple of studies that we published in medical journals that absolutely changed the way that doctors looked at pregnancy and diabetes. They didn't have to give a lot of insulin. They didn't have to give any insulin. put them on an exercise regime, and it burned that glucose. And so I was very, very fortunate to work with the world's leading experts in immunology, diabetes care, and we had a guy who was doing obesity research as well. And it was fascinating to go sit in their offices in the morning, and because you couldn't do that with your professors. They had office hours.
Yeah,
I just walk right in. It was somebody told me, he says, you have the equivalent of 2 PhDs. And I said, well, it doesn't matter, but now I get to come back to my roots. And that's a really good feeling, because I'm comfortable enough in this space not to have arguments with. I'm not debating anybody. We're going to educate the profession. Yeah. That's my goal. Educate them up. That's my goal. Educate them up. You guys you're gonna get the benefit of my experience working with the top diabetes docs 30 years ago. By the way, I was in Baltimore last year for the Medical Fitness Association. I had dinner with my old boss, Dr. Chuck Peterson, who was the CEO of Sansum. He was the medical director. So 30 years later, those who are still alive, I still am in contact with. They're part of my family. And like I say, this got a lot of meaning to me.
Yeah, of course. Well, and especially because the consequences can be very real. And one of the things that I appreciate that you said is you're not endorsing necessarily. It's just kind of one of those things where this is the direction we are going. It is not going back. It is going to continue growing. And you have so much experience in the fitness industry. Well, you've straddled and built this bridge of healthcare for decades, which we know is what the industry now is really leaning into, to be that collaborative bridge. And when it comes to these medications, the consequences are very real for those that are dabbling in this space. Right. And it needs to be done in a way, like to your point, I've spoken with some individuals at Lifetime as well, and they really were at the forefront and that's why they brought on Dr. Laval. And that's why they decided to have all these authoritative figures as part of the process. Because as you said, Chapter 1 was legal. So what would be some of the biggest legal concerns of people that are looking to enter this space from a fitness industry perspective? I bet you're like, I could have written many chapters on this.
No, it's not a lot, but I'm going to go back to the water. Dehydration, because the heart pumps in a sack of water. The viscosity of your blood is related to the thickness of your plasma, the amount of water in the plasma. Exercise improves, if nothing else, circulation. That's how people get better. I could spend an hour on peripheral vascular disease, type 2 diabetes, gangrene, most other peripheral circulatory issues, Guillain-Barré syndrome. What's the other one? Raynaud syndrome. All of these types of things are all improved with exercise. But when you take the water away, you have an issue. And when you're training someone and their metabolic processes can go up by up to 20% or 20 times, okay, you have to understand what's the simple thing here. Okay, so-and-so's got to have their water bottle. And after every 1 or 2 stations, they take a few sips. So at the end of their workout, that bottle of water is 2/3 done. I filled a bottle of water, I think it's in my car, from a company called My H2O Pal, H2OPal.com. And it's a bottle of water, and it's got a little sensor on the bottom. So as you I drank this 23.5 ounces this morning. It'll put it on your app.
Right.
So the
yeah.
trainer
So
and the client, exactly. I have all of that stuff, the technology that trainers would need to know, whether it's an outcomes, healthy stats software, which is from Weld Health in Virginia, to the H2O Pal. And I did a podcast a couple of weeks ago with Mo Iqbal and Matthew Janusik about the use of technology in GLP-1, like the Apple Watch, like some of these other types of things, like using Noom software for weight loss. Eric Malzone's done some podcasts on that as well. And it's like, wow. I mean, the fitness industry, clearly you want to be safe. But 30 years ago, when we were working with cancer patients, we didn't have apps and Apple Watches and that kind. We didn't none of that stuff. We had to do it the old-fashioned. Krissy, you had to put 2 fingers on your carotid artery. You don't probably know that because you got your Apple Watch. But I'm saying that I come from the old school where we actually had to do calculations by hand.
Of course.
But I'm glad we're at where we're at, because for the legal issues, for the physiologic issues, for the pathological issues, et cetera, that trainers need to be learned up on, the opportunity is amazing.
Well, and kind of to your point about like gathering a lot of information and the fact that we do have all this incredible technology that actually can track it. I know one of the things when I was looking at your page was about blood labs and the importance of that as well. So talk to me a little bit about why this would be important for fitness professionals to integrate into the conversation.
Right. Well, hang on just a second, because I have a very small office here.
I have to say my favorite thing is the show and tell and the accessibility of it all. I'm like, this is great.
Oh, well, I have in my back those two things are actually movie posters. I'm a big movie guy. So someone was saying, "Is that Gone with the Wind?" And I say, "Yes, it is. I've got Gone with the Wind and Casablanca, Citizen Kane, and The Wizard of Oz, the four greatest movies."
I was going to say some solid classics there.
Some solid, and then the next one on their right is Abbott and Costello. I'm a huge Abbott and Costello fan. So when you're talking about the GLP-1, you're talking about something that is very blood lab dependent. You're talking about A1C. You're talking about the lipid panel. You're talking about C-reactive protein, which is the inflammatory marker. And you're also talking about fasting or intermittent blood sugars. Well, how do you measure those? Well, I wrote a manual 4 years ago called The Blood Lab Wellness Specialist that, by the way, Krissy, I did nothing with. I just sat down one time and I said, you know what? I'm going to write a manual.
I love the casual. Yep, I'm just going to write a manual.
Well, I've done 7 certifications, and so now I get to use the blood labs. And I'm going to tell you something that I think your audience is just going to be flabbergasted with. Yes, you can go to my website as a trainer, and you can tell your client to go to requestatest.com, order that lipid test, order that C-reactive protein, order that A1C. It's like $129. Fabulous. However, I'm working with a company in Dallas, Texas called Perform Labs. And I would believe that by the end of this year, we're going to have our first series of validation studies done on the use of sebaceous oil wipes for doing blood labs. So I'm gonna do a little thing here. So there's a wipe. It's probably about this big, and I'm gonna wipe my oil, and I'm gonna wipe the oil behind my ears. I'm gonna put it in a FedEx bag. I'm gonna ship it to Dallas, and 24 hours later, my client's gonna get those blood results on her phone, on her app. She's gonna download the Perform app, the Perform Lab app. And he or she is going to be able to track all of this stuff, because as a non-invasive lab, you're going to want to do them every month because they're inexpensive, and your insurance will pay for it because it's still a blood lab. Great. But the other thing is, you do not need to be a licensed phlebotomist or nurse practitioner to take said lab. You wipe the oil from the side of your nose and the back of your ear, and you put it in a FedEx bag. It will revolutionize the industry. I am beyond excited, because you're looking at the guy. Remember olden days, Krissy, olden days.
I think you're underestimating my Botox here. Of
wow,
no doubt.
No, but the thing is like when I started at Sansom, one of the initial laboratory things that I did was validating the first generation of home blood glucose monitors. So we had our reference whole blood labs, and we would just, pipette blood samples on a dozen of these units. And then we came up with the 2 or 3 best companies. And so I'm very familiar with this. I've always been a fan of blood labs. And when I was at Sansom, I was always the control subject. So I'd have to roll up my sleeve and get about once a week or so, I had to get a blood lab because I was the non-diabetic guy with good veins. So it's revolutionizing the technology. It's not just about the Apple Watch, which is important. It's about blood labs. It's about outcomes technology. It's about different types of training methodologies, which I think have their own scientific validation that has been years and decades in the making. But we're at the zenith right now. I mean, we've got 18,000 exercise oncology trainers in the United States and abroad. Fantastic. By 2025, 6 months from now, there's a small group of exercise and oncology professionals, doctors, researchers, and clinicians who have been lobbying for Medicare in the last 2 years to get specific CPT codes or current procedural terminology codes specific to exercise and cancer. So therefore, if you've got an exercise and cancer program in your club, by this time next year, pending your physician relationships, you'll be able to bill out for those services for insurance. Fantastic. Well, what about these GLP-1 patients? Well, you can already pay for some of this using HSA dollars. Health savings account dollars right now can be used for weight loss programs. Last person I was speaking with was talking about TrueMed and some of these other bigger companies, but my contact person is Jason Paul from Lifecore Group in Phoenix, and he's an insurance company. So he will educate the trainers on how to actually use HSA dollars, both for themselves as a consumer, but for their clients. And his company, I hope in the next 12 months, is actually going to become the nation's first wellness health insurance company. So Krissy will be able to sign up for Lifecore Group as a consumer, as a customer, and you would get a certain discount because you're young and fit and probably don't use Botox. But you would be able to use a portion of that premium dollar, which would go right back to paying for your health club programs, just like the HSA dollars do. So I'm working in the GLP-1 space, but it really is revolutionizing healthcare, because one thing we learned from COVID is that healthcare still doesn't work very well.
Yeah.
And they just want to go back to normal. They just want all these patients to keep coming back and do all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, no, GLP-1, the docs want to refer to health clubs. So let's just bring them over there, but let's keep them there for life. Exercise for life is the mantra that I'm talking about with the club owners. Get them in for life. My father, in 1963, bought a lifetime membership to Universal Health Spa in Lansing, Michigan. Of course, my mother almost killed him because she said, George, how dare you spend $135 on a health club membership? We got kids to feed. Well, I don't even know, 43 years later when he passed away, I mean, his membership cost him about 63 cents a month.
Wild.
And when at his memorial service, some young kid came up to talk and nobody knew who he was. He worked for Bally's Total Fitness, who bought Universal Health Spas. And he goes, Mr. Durak was really a staple in our center. And oh, by the way, he was the last lifetime member that we ever had. So that was kind of a cool thing. And it's like, bring them back for GLP patients. If they can have the criteria, they come to the club a certain amount, they maintain their weight, they work with their dietitian, their trainer during the course of a year. Part of it gets HSA or reimbursed. There's no reason why you can't have them in the club for years to come.
Well, and I think, I can't remember the study, I could pull it up, but it was basically about adherence with GLP-1s and just the rate of people that kind of fall off from the program, taking the health club completely out of it. And I think, to your point, is that there's not necessarily the support with the lifestyle change, because at the end of the day, the medication is going to do what it's going to do.
Yep.
Your mindset and how you apply all these physical changes are a very different thing. And you've come up through the exercise and fitness industry space, so you know this. I mean, these lifestyle changes aren't necessarily the easiest. So what do you feel is the key to these programs to create that space that we could take people from this 80% populace we are not touching, have some of them come in the door and actually become that lifetime member?
Well, number one, like Pete Moore said, you've got this radius of doctors by you. They have to become your colleagues now because they want to refer patients. I don't know if I had mentioned earlier about this woman who I had a conference call with last week in London, who has 9 clinics and 500 patients a week that come through. She's looking for trainers. So I'm trying to get her hooked up with Active Anywhere and ProFit and all these other big organizations in the UK, it's like, do you guys not understand there's thousands of people over here that want to come to your club? How are we going to work on this? Well, they need to be certified. They need the information in my book. She's not going to have anybody referred to any trainer unless they go through my program, which is good news for me. But that goes back to what I said earlier. We want to train them up. I want these people to be experts in this. And I will continue to work on this. I mean, I'll have YouTube modules for the next year if I need to, because I want them to, I said before, I'm in a really good space right now. And you can tell how this stuff just comes diarrhea out of my mouth these days. You know what I mean?
But that's a sign you're very passionate about it. And so to your point where you're like, I don't know if I really want to do this. And then all of a sudden you put it all together. I'm like, you're clearly, from your educational background and what your interests are very meant to be playing in the space right now.
Exactly. Right. I'm the medical fitness guy. I started many, many years ago. I did my first fitness certification for ISSA in 93 or 94, wrote my cancer program, did my home healthcare programs, did all these other types of programs. And just my experience in working with these people. And when I started training cancer patients at the Santa Barbara Athletic Club, I didn't have any research to look at except this woman named Dr. Meryl Winningham from Salt Lake City. And she put breast cancer women on bicycles in a hospital. She didn't know anything about what I was doing with strength training or whatever, but I did it. It was very successful. And I really think that exercise in cancer right now to date is probably a version of the most successful form of medically based exercise in the US until GLP-1. A year from now, we will rival the cancer community with how many referrals that we get. If the industry does its job, and I think that they will.
Yeah, well, the conversation, the momentum that's banding together, it can't be ignored. And again, it is a natural fit. And even to your point, like you're talking about what you see through cancer, but even the studies that we see from the mental health perspective and treating depression and anxiety and the recognition in that, you have all these pillars that are essentially filtering into all the same places, which when you're in the industry kind of baffles you when you're like, how are we still only speaking to that same 20% when clearly this is what is needed for the population? And even what you said earlier, like it is a bit astounding to hear pediatricians that would be prescribing these medications, but the statistics for childhood obesity don't lie either. And sadly, the chronic disease evolution that happens with that and goes hand in hand. If we can prevent this, we know if you look at the healthcare economy, it costs boatloads in the billions of dollars, these illnesses. And this really is something that's going to combat that. Yeah. But I'm curious because I know with these medications, obviously side effects are quite documented and noted. So what is the balance? Because I understand the idea is to be working in tandem with healthcare professionals, but let's say you are a personal trainer, like where is that scope of practice if somebody's then struggling on these meds? Like that's got to be a fine line to cross.
I have this conversation. It's so funny that it's almost like you're listening in on some of my conversations. My business coach is Bob Asquari. And Bob is a legend in the health and fitness community. He's worked in many states. He worked with clubs in the UK. He worked with clubs in Russia for a number of years. This guy is, and again, I'm very grateful. And I can't use that word enough that I have people like him in my back pocket because he and I talk about scope of professional practice all the time. And I say to him that trainers don't prescribe this drug, but they're going to have to work with the doctors to manipulate the dosage. And again, I'm going to go back to my diabetes training. There are two things. One of them is that as you become more fit, you need less insulin as a type 1 diabetic or a type 2 diabetic because you have this process which is called non-insulin mediated glucose uptake. In other words, the glucose gets pushed into the cell just by virtue of being exercising. So you're using 10, 15, 20% of glucose that doesn't have to bind to an insulin molecule to get into the cell for energy. And so you better, as a trainer, understand that your exercise is blood sugar dependent, in that if they come in with a blood sugar of 83, they're not on the marathon training program that day. They're stretching, they're taking a couple glucose tabs, they're maybe having a protein bar or something. And it's the same thing with GLP-1, is that you're going to have to understand this dance between nutrition, hydration, exercise intensity and duration, and the prescription dosage. Because if somebody's on 0.5 or 1 milligram of Zepbound or Wegovy or something, they're not going to have the same issues as someone who's 50 pounds heavier and on 2.5 to 4 milligrams of the same medication. That's where you're going to have to just understand this, because like Jim says, there's a process where maybe the dosage goes up, where they have to find the sweet spot because their exercise protocol is sort of essentially the same, and then they'll start the taper. Beautiful. Love it. Trainers need to know that. and if they didn't listen to his, podcast, it's going to be in my book. All that information is in my book. And I've been on a podcast with Jim. I've listened to a couple other ones he's done. I learn about this stuff every day. Of
course.
I mean, you're not, oh God, that's the thing. I'm in the biz now. You know what I mean? It's like, well, you got to understand all this stuff. Every day there's something about this. Mm-hmm. I'm working on my second edition, and this thing just came out.
That makes a lot of sense, though.
You'd be proud of me, Krissy. I did my first chat GTP
nice
this week, and I actually, this is it. It's 27 pages. I'm editing it right now. So I've got 10 or 15 pages. So I've got about another 35 pages that I will actually put into the second edition here, probably in September.
Nice. I mean, it's incredible. Number one, in the world of AI, now we get to add an exponent to our being and ourself when you know how to prompt well and all the rest of it. But it does make a lot of sense. The space is constantly changing. I'm seeing new studies come out all the time. And I think what's really great, because with the deep curiosity, right? I think there's so many intersections of people having conversations that may have not necessarily come together to have the conversations, because I think people do understand there is a lot of responsibility in this space. And I think the one thing, I mean, it's not even something that you necessarily can answer, but it's kind of food for thought, because
I can answer
that
it.
I think of. I was like, I've got the faith, but I'm like, the thought in my brain is like, when I look at personal trainers and the labor shortages that we've seen and the churn, and sometimes them having trouble to make their quotas or worthwhile for them to have time in the space, I would think that there would have to be adjustments in the industry to some degree if you are putting, it's kind of a change of profession to a degree, you know what I mean? I'm really having to elevate their knowledge base in a new space.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful what you say, because I don't know how you're getting into my head, but you're actually defining my career. My first job was in New York City at the Sports Training Institute. I was a personal trainer. I did both, I'll call private clientele and corporate. We worked with E.F. Hutton, Morgan Stanley, et cetera. They had their own corporate venues. So I come out to Santa Barbara, and I'm still a personal trainer. I'm just working with people who I have to do their blood sugars, and I have to understand their lab panel, and I have to understand, I used to do fetal monitoring. I had women on exercise, UBE, upper body thing, and I'd have a fetal heart rate monitor on them while they're exercising. I mean, who does that? Well, I had to learn, but I never, Krissy, I never changed my training skills. I just learned medicine. A lot of people, when you read a lot of medical studies, doctors will put patients on an exercise routine, and it's very vanilla. It's ACSM, this, that, and the other thing. I went from the standpoint of being a certified strength and conditioning specialist and having this all of these hours of working with, athletes and corporate people or whatever. And now I'm taking those skills and I'm just plopping them into another venue. And that's what trainers should never go away from your roots, because trainers, I've been hearing this for 4 decades. Well, those trainers, they're not licensed. I mean, Bob and I get in these discussions, sure. Trainers are not licensed. And I said, yeah, but pharmacists and doctors are licensed. And look what happened. They screwed up everything. Suicides, depression, children not being able to, wearing masks that
we're still dealing with the after impacts.
We're still dealing with the after effects of these people who are in bed with the pharmaceutical companies. Before it was the COVID shots, it was the opioids. Before it was the opioids, it was other weight loss meds like fen-phen. Before it was the weight loss meds, it was the antibiotics. And before it was that, it was other drugs. There are complete listings for 100 years of drugs that have been prescribed that have been taken off the market, even though they went through clinical trials because they didn't work well. Okay. But you know that they're off labeling now the GLP-1s for cardiovascular issues, for Parkinson's disease, they're going to find 100 different uses for this thing because it's the money train. Oh, by the way, Novo Nordisk is from Sweden, and right now their profits are higher than any other corporation in Europe. That includes BASF. That includes some of these massive international corporations. And but wait a minute, GLP-1s have only been out for 10 years, and they've only become popular in the last few. But their profit margins are going through the roof. And like I say, that's okay. But, with trainers, never go away from your roots, because what you know as a trainer can be applied to these people. And I love what you said about they have to have the emotional IQ and they have to understand compassion, because what Dr. Renee Rogers from the University of Kansas Medical Center, she's been speaking at ACSM and IDEA and all these big conferences. And her point, she says very eloquently, you have to make sure they're comfortable enough to get into your health club and your program or your studio.
No question.
From the first day. And somebody was quoted, I don't know who it is, but I said it in a podcast. This was an industry that used to shun fat people. And not only
quite aggressively,
quite aggressively, because, hey, and now we have to not only recognize, and I'm using the word fat people because that's what was in the thing. We have to recognize fat people, and now we have to accept them, and we have to do it from the heart. We have to do it from the soul. It can't be on the banner of our ad in the newspaper. Oh, whatever. You have to truly have the compassion for this group. When I started working with cancer patients, I said to myself, this is really special. These people want to get better because they're staring mortality in the face. As a personal trainer, I went to my first funeral of one of my cancer patients in my first class about a year or so after. He never told us that he was not going to make it. He just came because he loved it. And that was sort of a kick in the pants. Yeah, old people die. He was 42 years old and he had 2 boys. God, it broke my heart. But it taught me something. And this is what I see that's going to happen with GLP is we're going to say the medication is going to get them to get that initial weight off. It's up to you to keep it off. And you keep them, and you keep it off by keeping them in the club, and you keep them in the club by they become a part of the family. And when they do, the industry will change.
Eric, that is just the perfect sentiment to wrap our conversation on. And I so appreciate the wealth of information that you have shared. How can people, I'm going to put it in the show notes as well, but how can they best connect to learn more?
Oh, they can go to medhealthfit.com, but the easiest way for people to email me is my last name, Durak, Durak fitness at Gmail, durakfitness@gmail. And I appreciate you having me on because there's a lot of energy coming from that microphone. And
thank you.
It was a really, really good conversation to have because, like I say, every time I do this, I'm hoping that a couple trainers will say, okay, I get what he's trying to say.
Yes.
I want to be a part of this. I want my club. I want my studio. I want this to be the most successful thing that the health and fitness industry has done since Jack LaLanne got on television.
You've just listened to the All Things Fitness and Wellness podcast, hosted by Krissy Vann. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. We have new podcast episodes weekly featuring industry insiders and influencers. Together, we're on a mission for everyone to live a life fit and well.